So this was 33 was the first like documented.
That is the earliest one I can talk about. Yeah.
There's something that predates that?
And it's mentioned in the Majestic documents is the 1897 Aurora, Texas crash event. Mars went and investigated and found the grave and found the original witness that took pictures of the little grave. And of course, once this sort of made public visibility, it all disappeared.
Well, that is a good way to push into it. So I do want to say, Ryan Wood, thank you for making the trip out to DC. I know we reached out a little bit ago, but your book, MAJIC EYES ONLY, is phenomenal. It's one of the most comprehensive analysis of crash retrievals from UFOs and whatever object people want to call it these days.
Yeah.
And so far in the book, we're looking at 104. I know this number is constantly updating, but we got 104 at this point.
Right, 104. The first book, which I published in 2005, had 74 crash retrieval events from around the world. And the new book has got 104. And there's a few more on my desk that I didn't put in because I ran out of time. I just wanted to get the book done and out because it was only me that could have updated this. And really, when I wrote the first book in 2005, I'm basically, 18 years ahead of David Grush's whistleblower testimony before Congress saying, oh, yeah, it's real. Oh, there's really crash retrievals. Well, wow. So I feel, like I was very much ahead of my time. And I ran 7 international UFO crash retrieval conferences from 2002 to 2009 in Las Vegas. When so much of the ufology young bloods were just going, starting when Dolan was starting, when Michael Schratt was starting, when Linda Howe was pushing forward, and Stan Friedman, but he'd been sort of a graybeard in the ufology field for a long time, and George Knapp, give presentations, and I gave voice to a lot of people in ufology at the time to come tell their stories. And that was the exciting, much what you do today is that you elicit people to come tell their stories and share that with the world.
Yeah, it's interesting. It seems like the dynamic recently has changed, especially, and this is something we'll dive into a little bit later, where, what you're highlighting with David Grush, but just in general, people are kind of really coming open to the idea of not only are there UFOs, but I feel like crash retrievals has been something that's almost been taboo, that hasn't been touched as much. I mean, everyone likes to talk about, I saw lights in the sky or whatever, Roswell will talk about that. But the crash retrievals, it's slowly starting to slip in the mainstream. And like I said, you're one of the few that's not only covered it, but comprehensively as well.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. And I agree. I mean, it has started to become more mainstream. And what's particularly impressive is that Grush said, in a SCIF, a special compartmentalized information facility, yes, Congressman Ocasio-Cortez, I will brief you about what the corporations that are involved and what the people are involved. And so there more people in a secret setting are getting informed about the true nature of the government's effort at reverse engineering and exploiting these celestial gifts, as I so call them, and that's the key. A new understanding, a refreshed understanding. Lots of people focus on, as you say, lights in the sky or abductions or other aspects of the phenomenon. But my exclusive focus has been always government documents and crashes. That's my bailiwick.
So let's dive into those a little bit. Obviously, MAJIC is spelt incorrectly on the cover. There's a reason for that. So can you maybe dive into the idea of kind of Majestic documents and maybe even the MAJIC 12?
Yeah, that's good. Well, MAJIC is Military Assessment of the Joint Intelligence Committee. So That was in a 1947 document, and then stamped top secret MAJIC, top secret MJ12, and so forth. But I guess the first thing that people need to realize is that there's some 3,500 pages of documents from 7 different sources spanning since 1984 to 1999 or so. And some are original papers, original inks, pen marks, stamps that you can do forensic analysis on, and others are photocopies or things that you can do research about. And the key thing is that it's from all these different sources. I mean, spanning all this time. And so that's the corpus of the Majestic documents. And there are, for the most part, all of them are available on majesticdocuments.com, that you can look at them and you can read the originals as they're arrived. But in my book, MAJIC Eyes Only, in the back, we reprint several of the ones that are harder to read, that tell a compelling story. Does that sort of answer the question about Majestic?
Yeah, definitely. Well, can you maybe explain kind of how they were getting leaked or put forward, where these documents are kind of derived from?
Yeah, sure. Well, the 7 different sources, they start with the Eisenhower briefing document mailed to Jamie Chandray in Los Angeles as an undeveloped film. And they develop it, and there's lots of investigations. And Stan Friedman and my father, Dr. Bob Wood, was involved in authenticating that and trying to find other copies of that. Now there's several copies of those, several different sources around just that one document, the Eisenhower briefing document, despite the fact that the FBI in their wisdom said, it's bogus. And they made an official statement about that.
Is that the MAJIC 12 document, or
it's what's called the Eisenhower briefing document. It's sort of the first leaked document, not the historically chronologically one. I mean, it's a 55, 6, 7 document, I think, is the date on it.
Can you explain what was said in that?
Well, there's a lot of different things that were said. I'd have to look at it again to really highlight it, but it was really it was a briefing for Eisenhower about the crash retrieval events. I think it talked about Roswell and so forth. It's I think a 5 or 6 page double-spaced document, but that's that's sort of what it is. But then going back to your original question of, talking more about the various sources, the next real one that sort of shocked me and shocked my father and is actually the most authentic document is the Special Operations Manual, Extraterrestrial Entities, Technology, Recovery, and Disposal. And that was mailed to Don Berliner in Washington, D.C., who was an Aviation Week and space reporter. And so, again, it was film that was delivered. And it was done as undeveloped Tri-X film, and when they developed it, there was, 20, 25 pages of a typeset document. There was a sort of how-to manual of, where do you take the bodies? Where do you send the parts? How do you cover it up? What are the EBINs, extraterrestrial biological entities, type 1 and type 2 look like, what the descriptions of them. It was very much a field manual and printed in that field manual style. And then people often said, well, they read this, which is available on the website, and they go, wow, this is stunning. How do I know it's real? I mean, it's always about the authenticity.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we went into the authenticity process, and there's several things that we could do. I mean, I did sort of the FBI thing of, where did it come from? Well, it was postmarked from La Crosse, Wisconsin, and at the Quillen Pharmacy. And so we found the Quillen Pharmacy. It was actually an annex of the Quillen Pharmacy, where they had a little post office. And then it was just around the same date as the Oshkosh Air Show that happens in Wisconsin, which is are you familiar with that show?
I'm not.
Yeah, well, this is like the premier experimental aircraft show in the world.
Really?
And people fly in from all over the place to this week-long extravaganza. I mean, it's growing all the time, but I think it's probably at least 50,000 people and hundreds, if not thousands, of airplanes, little ones and larger ones and old ones and people that are fixated with aviation all come together
In one spot.
In one spot, once a year. It's the Oshkosh Air Show. And so my impression is that somebody flew in, decided to mail this off, and mailed it off. But so that's sort of from that particular origin element. But then when you look at the manual itself, just on the inside of the first page, it's stamped Kirkland Air Force Base, Unit KB-81. No, yeah, KB-81, Building 21, I think. So then the question is, well, okay, that's Kirkland Air Force Base. And it was abbreviated N.MEX, MEX. And so it's not NM. So the history is that, well, New Mexico didn't have two-letter abbreviations then, back in, 54 or so. And so, well, that's a point of authenticity, is that they used the right stamp.
Yeah.
Now, if it said NM, we said, it's got to be a fake, because it's wrong. And then the question is, well, really, was there a Building 21? And so you went to the facilities manager at Kirkland Air Force Base. Oh, yeah, sure enough, there's a Building 21 in 1954. And they show you the maps. It's right here. And so you can drive around and take a picture of this cinder block building that was Building 21. So you go, okay, well, that's good. That all checks. And then there's something called a change control page on the first page of the document, which is for the officers, the MJ-12 officers, to initial when they swap out various pages of this little manual. Mm-hmm. I suspect that there's only maybe a few of these manuals that went with the various blue team or red teams off to crash retrieval sites, so that, hey, this is a 6-man team. It would be a SEAL team today. But back then it was one of these teams.
So you think it would be, so the red team and blue team, they would be operating still under U.S. military, or would it be under one of the agencies? So like,
I would think it would be under U.S. military back then. Mm-hmm. It may be different now.
Yeah.
But yes, so these change control pages, they had, I changed out page 22 through 23. I think the descriptions of the EBINs was updated once, and some other pages I think were updated. But there was initials, JRT and EWL. I mean, these names of these officers, the initials. And so I went to the Albuquerque phone book and found from 1954 the only people that matched. And that, it's colonel and captain, and by the way, they live on Perimeter Road at Kirkland Air Force Base, like 3 or 4 houses from each other. So,
What are the chances of that?
right. What are the chances of that? Exactly, Reed. So that's definitely a big check mark for authenticity is, what are the chances of that? So, and then I hired a private investigator to try to find these people, find their kids, find their children, where their wives. One was dead and buried, I think, in Florida. And the other was also dead. I can't remember where it was. I'd have to read the report. I mean, this is work that I did in the 2000s. Mm-hmm. And so then you try to figure out where the children are, and the private investigator that I hired private investigators are weird because they can just so easily just lie to people.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like they just do that. So he calls them up, basically says, "Hey, I'm an old buddy, blah blah blah," and gets them to say a few innocuous words about, he was in the military, this, that, the other thing. Nothing really smoking gun like, but then they sort of clam up and go away. But that was helpful. I mean, that's sort of all I could do. That was as far as I could take the providence aspect of it. I did do a remote viewing project on, who leaked it. You get a description of the house and the type of person and so forth, but nothing definitive. There's in the photographs themselves, there's pictures of the fingers holding the pages open. And so one aspect that you still could do is you could do like a forensic anthropologist to come in and look at the nature of the fingers and the level of hair. There's a lot of hair on the fingers, the level of hair on the fingers. And you could potentially begin to get some ethnicity details about this particular person that leaked it, potentially. I mean, you could keep going. I mean, it's a question of money. You want a forensic anthropologist? It's $500 an hour.
Yeah.
And so, they go on. And then there's other aspects of the Special Operations Manual, Extraterrestrial Entities, Technology and Recovery, that my father basically retyped the whole thing and created a replica of it. And in that process, you looked at what they call the etymology, so the word use in the book or the manual, and you see that they used terms like screwdriver was 2 words instead of 1 word, and nowadays it's because of the cocktail, it's 1 word. So that's an example. Oh, that's period correct. If it had been 1 word, we would have been struggling to say, well, maybe that's a sign of fakery. There's some other words in there as well that I can't remember the other ones, but there's some entomology details that are odd, and then there's the whole style of the manual. I mean, it's a government printed manual. So we found Robert McCarter, who is a retired U.S. government printing style manual expert. Basically, he wrote the style manuals, not the 50s, but I think in the 60s. And you would think they're little books, but no, they're really thick, complicated books about the style of how do you do government printing? What's the indentation? What's the leading? What's the spacing? How do you do bolds? How do you do italics? There's just all these nuances. Where do you put the headers and footers? If it's a classified document, there's different rules. And so it's just on and on and on. So we went to Washington, D.C., actually a place out in Virginia. Went to his house. I distinctly remember we were on this sort of green card table, and it was my dad and I and him, and we showed him this manual. It was the original 8x10 photographic negatives that we were showing him at the time from the leaks, and his first reaction was, well, from the title, I think it's fake. Extraterrestrial. It's just sort of the general shock.
Yeah, you're not gonna see that and be like,
right?
What the hell?
Yeah, exactly. It was the shock of it all. But then he sort of looked at it and said, "Wow, all the style approaches are correct." And then he found that the Z in the word synchronizer was raised a lot across above the line because of the hot lead printing press. Apparently, the Z's aren't used very much, so they get little debris underneath the Z, and it often comes up over the basic line.
Yeah,
of
the
straight. And so that process, just was another point of authenticity. We would never have found that subtlety, but it was him going, oh, yeah. Well, from this point alone, I can guarantee you this was printed on a hot lead printing press. And furthermore, I think it was printed down on 10th Street by the CIA, down over here in a cage. He'd been there. He'd been to all these places that do this as an expert in training operators and people in printing stuff, because there was no photocopy machines. You're just starting mimeograph capability back then. So I mean, things were typeset on monotype modern hot lead printing presses, and I think the government printing office still has a few. They do it for White House invitations where they need gold stamped letters. There's certain times when you want the feel, that indentation feel, that's different. You get a business card and you can feel the fact that there's ink on top of the paper rather than ink embossed into the paper. And so they still use them occasionally, but not very, very often. So McCarter was a great point of authenticity. He said, yeah, this is the monotype modern print and style of the era. And then they used the War Seal logo on the front of the manual. And people said, oh, it's a fake. Because they used this War Seal, and they officially were supposed to stop using the War Seal in 1950 or something like that, or 52. And this was a 54 document. But no, I found plenty other examples from actually the Stanford Library, where they had little field manuals of how to repair cameras and how to fix artillery shells and how do you clean your rifle, things like that, that used the War Seal. So there was another tick mark for authenticity. And much of this discussion is all on my website, specialoperationsmanual.com. So people can read scores of "it's a fake because," and then my response and explanation about why it is authentic and why it's relevant. So that's sort of a long-winded answer to that particular first manual.
No, but that is fantastic. I mean,
I could keep going on that. That one manual alone.
I mean, I do want to keep deep diving that because, I mean, I think the manual is really important for a number of reasons. I mean, one of the biggest is, and we've talked about him a little bit already, David Grouch, coming out and saying, like, we have recovery teams. So I'd be interested to hear, in evaluating that manual, like, what were some of the steps, the processes that were kind of detailed in there?
Yeah.
I mean, comparing 1950 to now, it's different, but it's interesting to hear.
Yeah. So the manual is stamped top secret MAJIC, and of all the some 3,500 pages of leaked documents, this is the most compelling and authentic in my father's opinion, and my opinion as well. This is the manual that I will go to court on and have the most respect that it's truly authentic for all these different reasons. And the contents of the manual is, again, it talks about initially a scope of, why are you doing this manual? And, well, it's about crash retrievals and extraterrestrial. And then there's a description of, how to secure the scene, how to secure the crash site, and then what sort of procedures you want to go through to do to cover it up, to just, how do you manage people coming? What's the cover story, so to speak? And they talk about it's a down satellite as one strategy, or it's a plane crash and there's radiation here. It's a meteor and it's radioactive. It's a biological weapon that's happened. They give all sorts of potential excuses to keep the public away. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of how they sort of cover it up or keep everybody away. So purpose and scope. Then there's introduction, recovery operations, and security and technological recovery. So a lot of this has to do with cordoning off the site and where do you looking at what do you do with let's say the alien bodies? Well, you need to wait for the OPNAC special team to arrive, which may or may not have been part of this blue or red team, or maybe a separate team to arrive. But
those teams were specifically to handle
specifically to handle the bodies. There's a page there. It's called the OPNAC BBS 01 receiving facility. And these living non-human organisms in apparent good and reasonable health, they have an MJ12 code of EBE 010. And they weren't always successful in the early days because there's some of our documents that talk about the Sandia Engineering District from Sandia, mm-hmm. which is right next to Kirkland Air Force Base. And engineering district technicians came to the site, maybe part of these recovery teams, or maybe this is before the recovery. The Roswell was sort of like the first real one.
Yeah, it was still sparked. I was actually about to ask about that.
Yeah, and this is after they have some procedures and protocols. So they just sent some people over that had, basic chemical suits of the time, but that wasn't good enough. And that they, these soldiers, after picking up the bodies and putting them in bags or coffins or what have you, died of profuse bleeding of the nose and mouth. So, sort of like Ebola. And so they had a fundamental, they didn't understand yet the danger of these biological entities from just a biological point of view. And so that was interesting.
I was going to say, I know that's like something pretty famous in Moment of Contact with James Fox. He talks about those Brazilian soldiers facing the same thing.
Oh.
Is this like a common occurrence? So, I mean, they set up these teams clearly to work around that, but is that something that has been seen if we're touching, if you're
I
not
think
protected
so.
properly?
There's evidence here and there's evidence in the other Majestic documents and the evidence from Fox in the Brazil case. I think the answer is yes, mm-hmm. Is that you need to be very careful when handling these biological entities. If they're alive, I don't know what the rules are, but if they're dead, there's toxic stuff. And even actually, as sort of a little sidebar, one of the Majestic documents, the fifth annual report, which is on majesticdocuments.com, talks about the potential to launch biological and virological weapons to unheard of heights based on doing science experiments around the biology of the aliens and creating retroviruses that could be weapons. And, this is back in the 50s when...
Everything was a weapon.
Right, yeah, where chemical weapons, Fort Detrick over here in Maryland was up to its eyeballs in chemical and biological weapons and biological research. And actually, this notion in that one paragraph in this report, people said, it's a fake because they used the word retro-virus. This is before Watson and Crick did the DNA thing. But when I went through the research of, you're right at the time of bacteriology is transitioning into virology and in basically understanding how disease works in science. And so I found all sorts of other examples of retro-X in the Stanford Library and in the scientific literature. So it was clear that it was a legitimate term and legitimately used at the time, and there's no reason to say, hey, it's a fake, despite the fact that, hey, I no doubt that they tried. They took samples of tissues and blood, if they have blood. I think they have blood, and tried to culture it and use that. I mean, it's all part of their Majestic exploitation series of science that is all deeply classified and all hidden. And going back to Grouch, he was never given access to these programs, and most people aren't. And they're getting better and better at the whole process of screening people that might participate in this so sensitive and maybe nowadays proprietary or outside the government environment, rather than in hidden secret doors within the government. So, I mean, I'm digressing a little bit from the Special Operations Manual, but that's what's in there. Then there's also another section here in the back. There's a chapter called the UFOB Guide, or UFO Objects Identification Guide. And this is from page 21 to page 28. So that was not included in the leaked photographs. But as part of the Freedom of Information Act process, we found, I think it was not my father or me, but some other researcher had gotten this UFOB guide. And it was just typed down on a normal piece of paper. It wasn't printed at all. But when you took that document and retyped it in this special operations format, it perfectly fit. The page breaks fit to, this goes to the next page. Oh, yeah, the subtitle goes to the next page correctly. And so the whole thing dovetailed in beautifully to this manual. And so, and the time frame was correct. So that was an example of another point of authenticity for the manual, is that here out of left field was, another aspect of the document that just dovetailed right in to the document. So that was good. And then I mean, the UFOB guide has identification criteria and possible origins too. So there's some speculation in there. But then
Wait, so when you say possible origins, is it origins in terms of?
Well, that's a good question. I think it's origins in terms of, let's just, I don't know if I reprinted it. I think it did. General identification criteria, optical phenomenon, meteors. Oh yeah, origins. Identification criteria, stars and planets, meteor, optical phenomenon. No, we didn't reprint that section. I'm sure we should have. General identification, possible origins. Nope. I don't know that section wasn't there. So in the UFOB guide, the possible origins wasn't there. Otherwise, it would have been reprinted here.
So is it safe to say though they're like evaluations of
potential, Zeta Reticuli or Andromeda, or where do they come from? Why do they know that? I don't know. This manual, and then there was references in the back, which were there, and all the references checked out. So it says, applicable regulations, for example, and they have, Air Force or military security and maintenance, and then there's supply regulation and other publications, and then test equipment and photographic references, and all these TM 11404A, references are correct. I mean, you can go find that manual and say, oh yeah, well,
right
they did a good job. It seems to be relevant there. So that's good that it all fits. So the Special Operations Manual is a cornerstone of the crash retrieval
theory,
total aspect.
understanding.
Yeah, and if ATIP and Grouch had just read that manual and said, where is it? Give me this stuff. And I think they probably knocked on the right doors, but they were denied access or being read into the program. Mm-hmm. I mean, being a major in the Air Force is not a very high rank, but nevertheless, I mean, I was impressed with his testimony in Congress, and he seemed to be very cognizant, using the appropriate terms, and well briefed. I'm confident that he did what he did, and said what he said.
So, talking about David Grouch, from continuing with the book, I guess getting into some of the cases. Grouch got pretty popular, and I'll show this video now of him speaking on Rogan, essentially saying, I think he was talking about the 1933 case and saying, well, we have cases before that. He just wasn't free to talk to them at that point, at least not on Rogan. He could talk on it possibly in congressional hearings, whatever it might be. Your book begins to highlight some of these cases, and I think a lot of people would want to hear. So can you start speaking to some of the ones that are kind of prior that Grouch is highlighting?
Well, the book starts in like 2000 BC with Mount Ararat, and the CIA's undue interest in this, from photographic to physical explorations to on and on. Is this an extraterrestrial craft that was there, that disintegrated, on and on? So that's sort of, it's kind of.
Can you explain that a little more, though? Because I do think that is something. The fact the CIA is looking at that is.
Yeah, it's actually, Nick Redfern, for example, did a lot more research about this particular aspect of it. So I don't know that I have much more to say, and I don't think there's much more to really report, other than they had a lot of interest in it for a lot of different, I don't know, I'm speculating for the reasons. But more to the first case in my mind is the, and it's mentioned in the Majestic documents, is the 1897 Aurora, Texas crash event. And then, this is in the time of the sightings of airships, the airship sightings. A lot of newspaper articles in San Francisco and Sacramento and other places around these various airships. But specifically in Aurora, Texas, where apparently there was a crash into a windmill tower near a well, and there was a small alien that was found, and they sort of pushed a bunch of the debris down the well, and the owner of the property had a lot of radiation burn and damage on his hands from doing that, some gourds and things like that. And then the little alien, according to the newspaper article, was given a proper burial in the local cemetery. There is a Texas historical marker that's there.
Really?
Yeah. It's a Aurora, Texas state historical marker, 1897 alien crash. So, and Jim Mars, who wrote the foreword to my book, Magic Eyes Only, the first one, and I kept it in the second one. I'd love for somebody to write another foreword to this book, but finding the right person with the right historical context is challenging. So Mars went and investigated and found the grave and found the original witness that took pictures of the little grave. It had a little headstone on it. Mm-hmm. And on the little headstone was a sort of I'd say a half of a triangle or sort of a V-shaped marking and three dots, three sort of white dots. It's sort of implying propulsion units of a little craft or something like that. And then also people did metal detecting of that and found that, there's three pieces of metal debris in the grave with him, the little alien. And of course, once this sort of made public visibility, it all disappeared. I mean, the little alien was dug up and the pieces weren't there anymore. But you still have the newspaper articles and the pictures and the witnesses. I was there. I saw it.
Yeah.
So that sort of disappeared. But that was one of the first ones. And in one of the Majestic documents, they talk about, we should redouble our efforts to, do a complete investigation, even back to the 1897 Texas case, or I think it's at Aurora, Texas case. So it's clear that the government grabbed it, or grabbed the little alien and the parts at the time in the 40s or something like that. And so that was one of the first cases. And then there's I don't have any data between then and 33 when Grouch says there's I don't know, the dates aren't here, but it's Aurora, Texas, and then it goes directly to Tunguska is also another one that's in the book as well, and Tunguska was, it's widely. There's been several books written about Tunguska event where you have this giant explosion and everything's flattened, but witnesses saw, erratic movement of craft, and then the explosion, and then what else? I actually had a remote viewing experiment done by Ed Dames, a long-lost figure of the remote viewing world, about the nature of the craft. and he said it was sort of a biological metallic hybrid craft. So it wasn't, we think of these crashes as being mechanical, rather than sort of a half biologic, half real or material. So he said it was a sort of biological craft, and then it self-destructed was the claim. I mean, in the remote viewing, I don't know how to, why do they want to self-destruct? Maybe it was such a big craft that they didn't want the evidence on planet Earth. There's probably all sorts of rules associated with the Galactic Federation or what have
Whatever
you.
they might be, yeah.
Right. To say, hey, this is much like Star Trek's prime directive approach of we don't want these little kindergarten planets to be suddenly overwhelmed for some particular reasons.
So that's, I think, a question a lot of people would have is saying, why are these ships, if you're able to travel the galaxy, you are a tier 3 civilization and we're only, we're not even tier 1 yet. Why are these aliens allowing their craft to go down or like be able to be caught or anything like that? Like, how are they not, what you're saying, there's rules, like how are they not approaching that differently?
Well,
there's a reason behind it.
Yeah, I have no definitive solution, but I can give you, several scenarios of why they crash. I mean, which is what I think the congressman from Missouri asked at the hearings. Is like, well, I'm from Missouri. Well, why did they crash? Why would such an advanced civilization do this? So there's several potential reasons. One is that we had radar, and maybe that interfered with their navigational capability, which is sort of what Philip Corso talked about in his book, that radar could be a problem. The other thing is you have natural weather phenomenon typical of New Mexico or Colorado of lightning storms, and particularly people don't realize that there's positive lightning bolts and negative lightning bolts. And negative lightning bolts are like 10x bigger than positive ones.
I did not know that.
Yeah, and they're somewhat rare, but nevertheless, they do occur. And so that may be something that they didn't understand or interfered with it. And then there's the notion of we shoot them down, be it with the old-fired 1942 crash events in Los Angeles air raid time with anti-aircraft proximity fuses, or a Stinger missile. I don't know, but certainly the history is sort of in the modern times is that pilots have been unable to get weapons lock on ET craft, or they out accelerate, or in the Joseph Mantell or the Mantell incident, where I think in the 50s he was a fighter pilot. He was chasing a UFO, and he got closer and closer, and he eventually crashed. But when they analyzed the crash, all the rubber material had sort of pulverized into dust, and it sort of it was as if the organic compounds have been rubberized, or not rubberized, but turned into dust. Basically, pulverized was the word I was looking for, and that caused the crash, amongst other things. So maybe it's the plasma from the getting too close to the craft, or somehow, maybe our jets are better now. But that's another reason. And then the most obvious one is that there are biological disposable drones or droids that they're on a one-way mission across the galaxy to learn. It's like, okay, I can go the speed of light. Maybe I can go faster than the speed of light. and I have instantaneous superluminal communication, faster than the speed of light communication, back to my mother planet or mother ship or what have you. And I'm ripping across the galaxy, this galaxy, next galaxy, trying to figure out as much as I can about everything, from life to people to the complete picture as much as you can. So it's like we don't pick up dead drones or UAVs in Ukraine. I mean, we don't care. And that's the thing, is that we value human life and care. At least most people do. And so we want to rescue the people out of the burning building. We want to, help the injured person from a car accident. The ETs may not have that same ethical, legal, or psychological profile at all, and that creates potentially tremendous challenge for the control group to deal with the alien presence.
Mm-hmm. Which of those items do you think you personally would put
the highest?
Yeah.
Well, and then there's one other thought, is the deliberate seeding of a young planet. Is if you, and this is what's happened. Okay, there's been crashes, so we now have this advanced technology that mankind is faced with. I mean, all our scientists are faced with this. Well, I don't know. How does this work? I don't know how it works. Well, we need to get more education. We need to do more research. We need to do more thoughtful scientific progress. We need to understand physics better. So the message from the ETs to this planet is you need to focus on science, innovation, and technology. We just gave you a big conundrum, and hopefully that'll motivate you to research, get it together, and keep going. And they have. I mean, I would say that, and this is maybe one of the great crimes against humanity, is that the control group believes that there's this cloistered group of 1,000 or 2,000 scientists that are smarter than the millions of other scientists and engineers around the world. And that only those little cloistered people can understand the data to begin to do more science. Where if you want to make progress, you just need a lot more people, a lot more thinking, and a lot more research about that to make progress. So I guess my number one approach is sort of a hybrid between they're disposable, exploring the galaxy, and there's some deliberate attempt to upgrade our world and let us join the cosmic kindergarten, so to speak.
So this is actually a good opportunity to kind of dive into one of the more controversial aspects. And this is talking about within the Majestic documents, with Magic 12 specifically, essentially looking into CIA killing JFK over alien disclosure. And not only that, but having an appetite to actually work with the Soviets in terms of the alien disclosure there. So can you speak to that theory and kind of build the background and what that actually looked like?
Yeah. Just a little context. I mean, Jim Mars, who wrote the foreword to Magic Eyes Only, was also an expert in the JFK assassination. He wrote several books, JFK Crossfire, about that, and explored all sorts of theories about why JFK was assassinated. From the usual suspects of the mob et al., but also one of the ones that came to light is one of our leaked documents, was a National Security Action Memorandum 271, I think, a NASAM, there was a directive from Kennedy to I think James Webb, who was the head of NASA at the time, to say we need to share with the Soviets the knowns and the unknowns, and distinguish those. And the unknowns being, of course, the code word for UFOs, UAPs, etc. So this was, I don't know, a week before he assassinated.
Good timing.
Yeah. And then you from an authenticity point of view of that particular leak document, yeah, sure enough, we found several other NASAMs, 270. I think there's some ones right around the same numbers of the right dates and times, the different topics. But so, oh yeah, that's a correct timing and numbering and so forth. So now, so I would put it in the category of this is yet another reason why Kennedy could have been assassinated. Don't know which reason is really the linchpin, but I suspect that it was the counterintelligence team of the CIA, particularly James Jesus Angleton and his organization, but some of his some of the leaked documents, the burned memo documents, talk about that, and the implication that if he says something, we need to make it wet, which is a code word for assassination. And so that is a very real possibility as to what happened there. As to the subtleties of how it really got done, and the grassy knoll versus the other things, I didn't study at all really. But there's loads of people that are fixated with how did he die.
It's pretty funny. I bring that up to like my dad and some of the people in his generation and stuff, and a lot of them just haven't really dove deep into it. And I remember I think this was during COVID, but I was like, hey, let's sit down, let's watch this documentary, because he was always like, no, that would never happen. And we watched the documentary after, and now he's like fully on board with me. He's like, yeah, it happened. It's cool. Crazy. But so then there's always the question of why. Why do you think the CIA would have been, and this is probably somewhat of an obvious question, would have been so against disclosure with the Soviets over these items?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, maybe they didn't have any intelligence that the Soviets had any crashes of their own. I mean, my impression is crashes happen all over the world. They seem to be, there's a bias in the book, at least, because it's English-speaking countries, so you get more Europe and UK and US, and you don't get any from China or Russia. There's one or two from Russia. So, they may have at the time perceived that Russia didn't have anything, and this is the ultimate secret. It's going to allow an improvement in their Cold War approach. I mean, this was very much in the Cold War time. I mean, they'd just been through the Cuban Missile Crisis, and Kennedy was sort of doing the olive branch thing, I think, to try to, hey, we need to come together and get to this more unified one world approach rather than fiefdoms across the globe. I still think that's one of our fundamental problems right now, along with all our nukes that are pointed at each other and potentially problematic. So I don't know if that quite caught the gist of your question.
Yeah, well, it's just like, was it similar to, and we'll get to Oppenheimer here in a second, but the idea of the Manhattan Project racing for the nuke is that we didn't want them to have the opportunity at this technology before we had the technology type of deal?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. And the question is, they may have had some hint of the potential of anti-gravity at the time, because This is 62 or so, or 63. And I think in the late 50s or early 60s, the U.S. sort of figured out anti-gravity as a function, or because of the evidence that they had from these crashed UFOs. And so, and that maybe ultimately enabled the entire hidden space program that people talk about now today. It's not just fancy Aurora craft hypersonic vehicles. It's gravity control. It's, let's go to Mars. So I think that might have been a motivation for Angleton to say, no, we cannot let this happen. We do not want them having the technological advantage, the national security advantage. It's just going to create so many different problems for us. And it's also going to engender a massive spying effort on the part of the Soviets, too, to get inside our organizations to try to figure out what we're up to. I mean, Angleton knew full well that, oh, yeah, we had a spy on the Manhattan Project, and it took them, a year afterwards to get a nuke. And they thought they had an advantage there. So they didn't want that happening again. So I think that was clearly a motivation. It's just too much risk. Yeah. The risk-reward ratio, hey, fine, what's Kennedy? It's he took us to the moon. He helped a little bit, but we'll get another president. It's just a person.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. Anyway, that's my thought.
So backtracking here from Kennedy, I did mention it as we were getting into here, Oppenheimer. So there is another infamous thing within the MAJIC documents talking about Oppenheimer and Einstein actually having a conversation, which, I mean, in itself, the fact that those two were a crossover at some point is pretty incredible. But this conversation, if you can dive into that and just kind of say
yeah. This is the Einstein-Oppenheimer memo. And it's like 6 or 7 pages or so, double spaced. It was from the time of, it was stamped top secret, but then sort of crossed out. And it said file OSRD, Office of Scientific Research and Development, which was Vannevar Bush's organization. But it was a sort of a think piece about, do the ETs have a right to be here? What are the laws associated with having them here? Or how would international law treat this? It sort of posed 5 fairly tough questions, and Einstein gave a very detailed, a thoughtful response. And so it's a very interesting read. It's very, the other Majestic documents are more fact-based, military, what to do, how to do it, here's what happened. And this is more of a philosophical piece about, and to some extent, it's covered in the AI ufologist as well a little bit. So there's aspects of authenticity that we can talk about with this particular document. Maybe I'll do that first. And so it's signed by Oppenheimer and Einstein in the back. And there's a little handwritten note that says, I agree with them, VB, which is Vannevar Bush's, correct signature. I've seen hundreds of times in the National Archives. So the handwriting, in my mind, from Vannevar Bush, which is a short little comment, absolutely check mark, correct. And then the question really is, well, who really wrote this? Did Einstein write this, or did Oppenheimer write this, or it was really a joint thing? So we hired a forensic anthropologist, not anthropologist, forensic linguistics person, Dr. Carol Chowsky. And she used a computerized method. So what you do with that authenticity process is you have a bunch of examples or exemplars of Einstein's writing in 1947, and a bunch of examples of Oppenheimer's writing, and in fact, because it came from Tim Cooper, name we haven't mentioned yet, but he was one of the sources from Thomas Cantwell of the Majestic documents of Tim Cooper's writing, and Tim Cooper had written a book, the unpublished book on the White Sands Proving Grounds and so forth. So you had all these three different aspects, and and it's typically 50 pages of each. So you have a lot of language to fingerprint. So everybody's language is fingerprintable, so to speak, in the way they write, in the way they speak. If you have enough data, you can get a clear idea. So you use those three data sets, and Carol went through her process and did statistics of adverbial clauses and adverbs and verb usages and sentence lengths and on and on and on about how to fingerprint people's. And the conclusion was that she was highly confident, over like 90% or so, that yep, Einstein wrote it. And there's words too. There's use of res nullius and res cumus, sort of German words within the. But Oppenheimer might have used those words too. So there was that aspect as well for the forensics. So it's from that process, I concluded that yes, absolutely, it is a real Oppenheimer document. It's real, and it's a very interesting read. And so that's sort of the Oppenheimer Einstein document, and the questions and the answers and the conundrum that he discusses is just as relevant today as it was back then. Is how do you get along with an advanced ET civilization? How do you do this integration? And my own opinion is that we're never going to get the ETs to come here and say hello until we have sort of unified the planet. Nobody's starving. Everybody's sort of educated. There's less strife in the world. There's no wars. And the nukes have been cleaned up. So it's sort of like, you want to join the cosmic kindergarten, clean up your planet.
Mm. Can you explain, within those memos as well, there was some conversation between the two, basically detailing their belief of the possibility of extraterrestrials. I think a lot of people hearing that, it's a little bit mind-blowing because those are two of the most sought-after, well-known kind of scientific individuals. So for them to at least be acknowledging it, especially at that point in time, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. But it's fascinating when you look at the other Majestic documents. There's some of them where some of the advisors on the White Hot report in September of 47 were Oppenheimer, were Einstein, where it was von Karman, a famous, thermodynamics, and not thermodynamics, but airflow analysis czar and original, very much into wind tunnels. And then von Neumann, the inventor of the basic von Neumann style computing instructions for computers. So these titans of science historically were all plugged into this to try to talk about and think about how to deal with this this challenge.
So a lot of times people want to talk about the development of technology kind of aligning with some of the key crashes that we've seen. What is your personal belief on that?
Well, the personal belief is that I think that some technologies have been reverse engineered or accelerated from the ET data. I think there's probably a lot of material science that went on at the University of Chicago about this time, and I think that the material, they had the metals from the craft to look at, or the various things. They're using pure isotope, magnesium 26 here, or they're using layered bismuth magnesium parts here in the craft skin. What does that tell us? I mean, I think there's some science there or using titanium aluminide before titanium aluminum was even available. Mm-hmm. So there's things like that happened sort of, I think that seep into our culture and society and science without any grief at all. And then there's things like fiber optics. Because in one of the documents, there's a description of these glass fibers with this cladding type wrap. And the key breakthrough in fiber optics was improving the signal and noise ratio of fiber optics with wrap, cladding wrap that goes around. Nowadays, they have a glass fiber with a certain diffraction window, and then around that they have a different diffraction window, and that in combination with good error control can allow you to do signals over a certain distance, long distances with fiber optics. So I think fiber optics is one of the ones that may have been accelerated. Then there's the notion of the transistor. Bell Laboratories in 47 and Shockley and so forth are doing their work with and I think that I give them full credit for inventing the transistor. I don't think that was ET stuff. But what really got accelerated was when those guys got exposed to integrated circuits that they probably found on crashed hardware. And say, we can do not one transistor, we can do a bunch of transistors, and we can do it in this die. And so they probably learned a lot about how to potentially, where to go and how to think about it. And then it's the hard work of the scientists and engineers of Gordon Moore and Moore's Law and the invention of the microprocessor and the work of von Neumann with the von Neumann style machine of microprocessors and that acceleration of integrated circuits, which has transformed our planet, our phones, our computers, our TVs, everything has improved our communication and ultimately helped reduce the stress and accelerate our progress. So I give the integrated circuit, I would put, as a potentially strong possibility to have been accelerated by ET hardware. And then the mother of all, there's two other big things. The one is the biology of the EBs, which we don't know much about, and how that came to pass.
What do you mean by biology of EBs?
How do you? They had EBINs from crashes, and then the question is, did they do biological weapons with those things? Did they do retroviruses? How did they study that? And we don't really know or don't have any evidence that helped our biological sciences, in my mind. Watson and Crick with the DNA thing, and then CRISPR with, I don't know, what was it, 10 years ago or so? That was a big in gene editing, and actually bringing it up to today, in my mind, it's the work of Dr. David Sinclair at Harvard and the Yakinama factors, and Yakinama getting the Nobel Prize for these growth factors, which allow for potential complete biological refresh of the human basically allowing yourself to be, your organs and so forth, to be 20 years younger. And they'll get better and better at that. And that will come out in time. But I don't think that's really related to ET stuff. That's just related to our progress. But it was all enabled by the fact that you could do the transistor and the really iterated circuit. But the mother of all secrets that may be related is anti-gravity.
Can you dive into that?
Oh, yeah. I would be happy to. We all know that ET craft don't burn kerosene.
Anything.
Although there are some examples of craft that create like smoke rings, where you have a saucer and then it accelerates out of the sky and it leaves a smoke ring. Mm-hmm. And I don't know quite what that's about, but there's some debris occasionally, but some of them don't even have that at all. So they recognized early on that it's a neutronic or aneutronic power plant, nuclear plant, with or without radiation is sort of the difference between neutrons. And actually in the white hot report of the Majestic documents, there's a description of the Roswell neutronic power plant. Well, it's got uranium hexafluoride in it, it's got this and that. And, the list is like a 10-point list. And that was ultimately one of the pieces of authenticity that we looked at, is it mentioned an NE-102 material, which you could find in the junkyards of Sandia. It's sort of a comment about, it was historically accurate at the time. So, but back to the focus on anti-gravity, they knew it was nuclear or gravity control, and there was some breakthrough in physics that we had to have. And so they began to work on it. And there was a series of newspaper articles that came out in the late 50s. One in Young Men magazine called "The G Engines Are Coming," written by a guy named Michael Kladwich, who had also written a book, fiction, mind you, he wrote a few years later this book about Admiral Byrd and Antarctica, which I thought was kind of fascinating, synchronicity sort of estimate. And I'm sure your listeners have heard about Admiral Byrd's Antarctica stuff. So there was this article, "The G Engines Are Coming." And within this article, there was a series of corporations that are listed. Glenn L. Martin, which became Lockheed Martin, and Bell Aircraft, which is now, Bell Aircraft doesn't exist anymore. But and then there was Sperry Gyroscope listed, and Sperry Flight Systems, and several other corporations, Lear of the Learjet, actually it was his father, was doing research on gravity control, and another outfit, Dudley Clark, Clark Electronics, out in Palm Springs and Cathedral City in the deserts southwest. Well, one of the ones I find interesting is that he, you find his newspaper articles, and he had equivalent of like $6 million and 23 people operating out with 50% classified contracts out in the desert. I mean, this is the 50s out in Riverside County or Imperial County in Southern California. And there was no Palm Springs. I mean, Palm Springs was a single palm.
Yeah.
and there was no civilization out there. It was really out there, sort of all cloistered and hidden. So I find that interesting. And so these people were working on it. And there was a couple other articles by a guy by the name of Stein on the White Sands proving grounds about gravity machines are coming, and then ultimately it sort of fades out and disappears. By 1960, there's no newspaper articles. They've sort of clamped down on what's going on, and there's nothing to report, or it sort of disappears. And I suspect that they continued to work on this, or had a breakthrough and said, hey, we've figured out gravity. We've made a G engine. We made something on the tabletop that will reduce gravity, and now we can start doing. And then Michael Schratt, the aviation historian, and done a lot of UFO cases, talked about the Oklahoma case where they had very much a gravity craft. It looks like a sort of a stretched out egg, where a man in basically an Air Force uniform comes out, and human looking. It's hard craft. It's got numbers on the side. There's a lot of detail to say, oh wow, but it's a one witness person was driving his car in Oklahoma, and this craft was on the road, and he stopped and got out, and it was written up in Blue Book. It's like, but they didn't give it much credibility. But it's just one person report about this is what was going on. But I thought it was interesting in that it was there was evidence that seemed to suggest that, oh yeah, they may have succeeded at this at the time. So anti-gravity and gravity control is the ultimate secret that has been reverse engineered from alien craft. And that breakthrough in physics. The other thing that was interesting is that Ben Rich, at his retirement, Jan Harzan, who used to be the director of MUFON, Mutual UFO Organization, was there at UCLA when Ben Rich, who was the head of Lockheed Skunk Works, was retiring, I think in the 80s or so. And they give him a bunch of awards, and he made some comments that, we now have the technology to take ET home. Yeah.
Take ET home.
Take ET home in a public place with a lot of witnesses. Mm-hmm. And Jan runs after him after he's after the lecture. Well, hey, tell me more about this taking ET home. And they had a quick conversation about it. And, it's really, I can't tell you much more about it. It's classified. But it was one of those, circumstantial evidence pieces that it sort of brackets the time frame of absolutely they probably didn't have gravity control earlier than 1955, and absolutely they didn't have it later than 1985 or whenever this conversation with Ben Rich was. But anyway, I'm fascinated with that. I mean, ultimately, the it's got deep problems, as everybody knows, from climate change to man's inhumanity to man, to the war in Gaza, to nukes, to on and on and on, to feeding the starving people around the planet. This mess is everywhere. And the only way to fix it is to provide energy. Basically have a physics breakthrough, fundamental free energy or nearly free in the form of fusion, which I'm working on as the CEO of Electric Fusion Systems, and having antineutronic portable fusion, where you can have a roller bag that supports your entire house or this entire apartment complex or something like that. So that or gravity controlled, because if you have 2% less gravity in a device, you can put it out at the edge of a flywheel, and the flywheel will just keep going forever. So it's free energy. I mean, in essence, the motor will keep going. There's probably a more efficient way of doing it. of capturing that energy into electricity. Because everybody needs electricity. We need it for, more server farms, for greenhouses in the middle of the desert, from sucking water out of the air in the middle of the desert to internet support, on and on. I mean, Elon Musk's vision of, well, you want to help the world? Let's give everybody internet access. I mean, 30% of the world doesn't have it. We need, more. And eventually in a few more years, maybe 5 or so, the whole world will have it. And then there'll be less disinformation, and there'll be more clarity around the truth.
Mm-hmm. Can you detail maybe what the properties and capabilities of these anti-gravity machines would be? Because, hearing that, for what you highlighted there, the free energy potential is there.
Yeah.
But sadly, I don't believe Raytheon is looking at that as probably their prime opportunity there. So what are some of the main opportunities or utilizations they're seeing with this technology?
Well, do you want to know how you do such a device, or how to make such a device, or what are the applications of the device?
I suppose both.
Both
would be
okay.
helpful.
So we talked about the applications a little bit, where you could probably have a small device, again, not fusion, for example. You could implement it with a fusion breakthrough that we're working on, or you could implement it with an anti-gravity way to generate electricity in a small portable device. So it would end up going into cars and trucks and transportations, and you could do a lot with airplanes, and it's portable, compact, radiation free. It allows for transformative and low cost. That's the thing, is that, what are we paying, 15, 20 cents a kilowatt hour here in the US on average. Japan, it's 5 times worse. Europe, it's 10 times worse. So you can basically drive the cost of electricity down. No matter what technology it is, if it doesn't reduce the cost of the electricity, you're not going to get any big adoption or change. Or, you really need to be able to suck water out of the middle of the Sahara Desert and put up a greenhouse and grow food for much, much cheaper than any other way, and improve the quality of life for so many people, and educate them. Mm-hmm. So the applications are mind-blowing and disruptive, stock market and people. And
would these be utilized in like engines as well, though, for like ships and such? Or
you could do it in ships, sure. You could, you generate electricity. You can have electric motors to push ships along.
Okay.
That's one way of doing it. I still think that moving freight, maybe that's one of the most effective ways to do it, even if you have gravity. Maybe if you've got gravity control, you just hook a gravity pack to a 40-foot shipping container, and it flies across the world and lands where you want it. I don't know. It probably works. So there's loads of applications and loads of potential disruption to transform the situation and upgrade our plight, so to speak. As to how you actually make an anti-gravity device, there are lots of clues. You could start with the Roswell bismuth magnesium part that Linda Moulton Howe got from Art Bell, and did a fair amount of scientific analysis on. Actually, she wrote it up in I think the third Crash Retrieval conference proceedings, where she had third-party analysis done by who's the guy that's on Skinwalker Ranch, the scientist guy. Anyway, before he was famous, he did this report. But this layered bismuth magnesium was like 4 or 5 microns of bismuth, and then 200 microns or 100, 200 microns of magnesium at 15 layers. And so you somehow get the idea that while bismuth, which is really a weird material in that it is what they call diamagnetic. So if you have a magnet on the table and you put bismuth on top of it, the bismuth floats on top of the magnet. Yeah. It's the highest diamagnetic material. So it creates an opposite. It doesn't like magnetic fields. So it gets a magnetic field and says, oh, I don't like that, and pushes back and creates sort of an opposite magnetic field to allow it to repulse and float. And it's what's called diamagnetism. So you get a sense of, oh, well, that I think is an important aspect to gravity manipulation or control. The other thing that you've heard in many of the reports is that there's this notion of counter-rotating things, counter-rotating disks. You know, one part is spinning one way, one part's spinning the other way. So the notion of counter-rotation is another aspect to think about. And then lots of data written up in Paul Hill's book, who is a NASA scientist about who focused on the scientific work around flying saucers. What can we learn scientifically? We have a saucer here and accelerates over the horizon in 1.2 seconds. How many G's is that? Or people are wearing Polaroid glasses before the advent of fancier glasses now, where they could see interference fringes from the polarization implying a magnetic field, a huge magnetic field of a flying saucer, saying, oh, this is, a million Gauss or something like that. So it's clear that large magnetic fields are associated with, implied with some sort of form of gravity control. So you have the notion of magnets, counter-rotating magnets, and diamagnetic pressures associated with that. And then there's the electrostatic discussions. There's several craft that have had these pods, sort of propulsion pods, where they have spheres on either side with a little gap in between, and like a lightning bolt going back and forth, sort of an electrostatic or lightning bolt going back and forth. And static electricity, many reports of, my hair was standing on end and things like that. So there is clearly very high electrostatic fields associated with these craft. And so that may be another secret to anti-gravity control or gravity control. And then the notion of sort of asymmetrical capacitors or asymmetrical electrostatics. So if you have a let's see how to describe this. If you have a half of a sphere, and the outside half, the large volume half, has a very high potential, electric field, and then on the inside you maybe have a very small. The outside's negative, and then the inside is positive. Maybe a little tiny cup that's 1/10 the surface area, and there's a bunch of dielectric material or insulation between these two cups. So you have this what are called differential electrostatic fields. So in essence, does some concentration. But that's an aspect of the shape of these crafts and the shape of the propulsion and the sort of white pods that are on these triangular craft or that people see. Mm-hmm. So those are some of the elements that I think are involved in the nature of this anti-gravity breakthrough, which I haven't figured out. Mm-hmm. But others probably will in the future, but I think it's not beyond the well and motivated hobbyist or the well motivated small corporation to make that understanding.
So that's, I guess, diving into my previous question a little bit more. like I understand what you're saying with like the technological opportunity or the application process of using it for like limitless energy and stuff. I think the other area that people would be curious to think about is its ability. When I say used as an engine, I'm saying in the application process of some of these vehicles that appear to be moving at speeds unattainable through natural processes, or if they're able to travel faster than light. I mean, I know, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, that our Cuvier drive, which is popularized in terms of anti-gravity and being able to create that
bubble, that warp bubble.
Yeah. I guess the question would be, and this is always stated that all the alphabet agencies are like 20, 30, 50 years ahead technology-wise. Do you think that we have yet to reach that type of capability, or do you think that that's currently what's being kind of worked on, and the initial ground breaks were with kind of limitless energy in that area? Or how do you think those two go hand in hand?
Well, I think that the anti-gravity is sort of a new paradigm in physics, and it's one thing to, experimentally make a device and say, holy shit, it floats. Well, how does it do that? Go to the whiteboard and write the partial differential equations on the whiteboard about, well, how does that work? Redo Einstein's general relativity and this basically solve the unified field theory. I mean, this is one of the things that Ben Wrench, I think, mentioned, said, we found the mistakes in the equation and fixed it. And this caused a sort of a breakthrough in understanding. And so to go from, we made an experiment that's anomalous and repeatable and interesting that races gravity, to understanding how to really design to a gravity or a warp drive or a faster than light drive or a time travel aspect, because this time travel seems to be related to this aspect.
How so?
Well, when you travel, up to the speed of light, things slow down. Mm-hmm. So just from Einstein's point of view, you know that time is involved as you get closer to the speed of light. If you go past the speed of light or faster than the speed of light in your bubble, which your bubble may not go faster than the speed of light, but outside your bubble,
space
is going faster than the speed of light. So maybe outside your bubble, time is changing. And so that's, I'm just sort of speculating from what I've exposed to. So that's an aspect of how things are sort of different. I think that Linda Moulton Howe has mentioned that some EG&G guys had a candle experiment where they got time to change or something. I can't remember the details, but there's a lot of speculation and research in this particular area. But I think fundamentally, if they figured out the nature of gravity that unlocks the whole warp drive faster than the speed of light, then it's an engineering problem too. I mean, you'd still have to engineer it well to figure out, how to not let your people, die because we care about them. So that's, I think that's sort of all I have to make a comment about the time travel.
For your estimation, how close do you think we are then in terms of this technology?
When you say close to what? Close to public acceptance, public visibility, or
public visibility for
anti-gravity?
Applications similar to that.
Well, I give great credit to the control group to keep it secret. They're the people that should get the Nobel Prize. Well, I don't know. I don't think that's the right thing. It's the Nobel Anti-Prize or something like that. It's the Anti-Nobel Prize. This is great harm in what they've done. They would argue that it's great good. But there's hell to pay no matter what. If they tell the truth now or tell the truth later, it's just, it's going to be a bad situation. So where was I going with this? When will it happen? And so it's almost going to the disclosure aspect of when will disclosure happen, when will it not happen? And I put disclosure in two types. One is the ETs showing up that we talked about earlier, and saying, "Yep, you guys are ready to come on board, or you've advanced far enough, or we're willing to not upset your population by our presence." And I would give that the 2050 timeframe. Yeah.
Why particularly with that? Is it just kind of
It's like I think that society will have matured and grown long enough at 2050. I mean, some of the remote viewers like Stephen Schwartz and others have said, that's the time, 2050, 2060 is when they're going to open up from their perspective. Now, from our perspective, from the government cover-up perspective, I mean, they could come clean if they wanted to. In a year, probably. Take some time in preparation. But that starts a big cascade of questions and problems for them. And my book, The AI Ufologist, sort of talks about, well, how do they manage this disclosure? What would they do? What's the best way of dealing with the need for secrecy and the need for transparency? How do you mesh those two to be thoughtful about progress? So I think that, every year they probably go through this drill of, well, here are all the reasons why we should tell the truth and explain, and here's all the reasons we shouldn't. And the list on the shouldn't side is always a little longer. And this is just pain. I mean, okay, we're not alone in the universe. Well, how do you know that? Says the press. Well, we've had crash saucers. Well, gee, cool. Can we see one? Yeah. Here's some parts. Well, where's the rest of it? Okay. Well, here's a power plant. Well, how does it work? Well, we really can't tell you that. Well, where's the occupants? Well, we have one of those. Let me see it. Okay, well, here it is. Can I take samples of it? No, you can't take samples of it. Why can't we take samples of it? Well, because you can make biological weapons with it. Oh, well, oh my goodness gracious. Have you done that? And so you go back and forth down this continual rabbit hole in Alice's Wonderland into more and more tension between learning in a public's perspective and disclosing. Well, do you have a live alien? Well, we do, but he died. Well, give me the videotapes. What did he say? Well, do you have any relationships with these ETs? Well, yeah, we do. We made a treaty with them. I'm sorry about that. Well, who signed the treaty? Well, Eisenhower signed the treaty. Well, can you do that? The Congress has to approve treaties. You violated the Constitution. The Supreme Court, I'm going to sue you. It goes on and on. It gets into this giant conundrum. Richard Dolan wrote this long book, and others. There's another co-author on after disclosure AD, which addresses some of these aspects. So, I support Steve Bassett and all the people that want disclosure as much as possible. And it's a sticky wicket. We had sort of a quasi-disclosure with David Grouch. He came out and said, yep, we have crash retrieval and a program to reverse engineer it. And no, I can't tell you about it. And the ATIP people wrote yet another more embarrassing report as to, there's nothing to see here. It reminds me of the Roswell report that Doty wrote. A little technical sergeant guy, which I find, surprising that they give such a low level such an important job to such a low-level person to do that. So it's just a long history of badly orchestrated cover-ups. But maybe that's what they want. Maybe they want that.
I was about to ask you about that, but you just kind of highlighted something, so I do want to also get your opinion on this. You highlighted the Eisenhower meeting, essentially. That's obviously like pretty controversial. Some people may have not heard of it. What's your viewpoint on that?
Well, I haven't studied it very much, but
and if you can explain like what it was, just so
I think that the general theme is that I think Grant Cameron's done some work on this. I think that Eisenhower's granddaughter's done some work on this. But the basic premise was that Holloman Air Force Base, and I want to say, I don't know what date it was, but the ETs landed, sort of shook everybody's hand and said, well, I want to do a treaty. Here's the deal. I think of the deal basically is we're going to abduct humans, but we're going to give you ET technology. That's the deal. And I'm sure that's more complicated than all that. But I'm reminded of Dan Sherman and the book he wrote, a thin little book about his firsthand experience at the National Security Administration, sort of doing mental and psychic communication between ETs and the NSA. I think that's where I first heard the concepts around the nature of the deal. Basically, we'll give you technology for abducting humans.
Mm-hmm. So I guess one thing, we've gone through, it's been like a pretty long timeline. So you think at some point they were able to kind of master anti-gravity technology at some point between late 50s to
early 60s.
60s?
Yeah, early 60s. I think it's, other people debate this, but as far as the evidence, and I'm starting to dig into this. I mean, I watched Nick Cook's video on the hunt for Zero Point that he recently updated a video about a year or two ago about his efforts in anti-gravity research and his conclusion, I think, is late 50s. Late 50s, I think, is when the breakthrough happened. Some people put it a little earlier, but as far as I can tell from researching these newspaper articles in 57, that I think that's when it started to happen.
So that gives a pretty long time frame in terms of being able to start working out some of the more key elements of technology applied to, ships, crafts, whatever it might be. Over the past 2-3 decades, we've seen a lot more exposure of actual film. We've had fighter pilots come forward actually talking about circumstances of interacting with these. Oftentimes we've seen them off of like the coast, being able to go underwater and go.
Yeah.
The conversation has now shifted into some thinking that, is this technology from home? Is this the U.S. government's technology? Is this China's technology? Is it any of these nations maybe competing and working? How do you see that? Do you think that there is a level of us testing our own technology that we've utilized? Is it a mix and match of civilizations from beyond as well as of human technology? Like, how do you see that?
Well, I'd say it's definitely a mix and match. But back in the 40s, it wasn't. Mm-hmm. It was all them. And as for the Tic Tac videos, I think that was ET craft. But it's definitely the flying triangles seem to be potentially some ours. I mean, even the Special Operations Manual, they have a page that describes in 1954 they had the classic saucer shape. They had the cigar shape, the cigar mothership. They had the ice cream cone shape of Cash Landrum case style, and the flying triangle. shape. So those were the sort of shapes that they highlighted from an identification point of view. And I think that the gravity breakthroughs that they've enabled them to do a typical saucer shape first, I think, and then ultimately sort of a flying triangle or a flying V. But I think these are rare and few and far between. Is that most of the sightings are genuine ET stuff, because the last thing the military wants is, whoever the pilot was said, you let an entire city see our advanced technology, you're getting demoted.
Yeah.
No way. Don't do that. We want to hide this as much as possible, so that, nobody is seeing our stuff. And I think it's still just the U.S. that has the stuff. And I think that China is still trying to catch up. I am somewhat fascinated that one of the people that did a lot of the theoretical work on gravity control was this woman by the name of Ning Li in Huntsville, Alabama, at the Redstone Arsenal. Have you heard of her name before?
I have not.
Yeah. So she wrote several peer-reviewed, highly theoretical papers on gravity control and how it works from a theory point of view. And the peer-reviewed people said, yeah, this is reasonable and so forth. And then she got a variety of government contracts, and she formed a company called AC Gravity, I think. And then she basically disappeared. The rumor was that she went to China, and for 3 or 4 years she was gone. Mm-hmm. And then she came back. And she ultimately died in the U.S. in 2017. And I recently filed for her FBI file. So I'll have to wait a while, but I'll get it.
Yep.
And or it'll get redacted, and I'll get to appeal it, and we'll find out what's going on in more
redacted
detail.
Redacted hints towards something too.
Yeah, exactly. Redacted hints towards well, we can't tell you, she left the country on such and such a date, and there's now 15 pages of redacted material, most likely from the CIA, because they're over there spying on her. So my impression is that there's an example of somebody with severe expertise in gravity that goes to China and comes back. Now, I'm not to dismiss the billion people and all those scientists over there. I mean, they got more geniuses than we do. And I think it was a 60 Minutes program or something like that, where they highlighted the screening of exceptional kids from a very early age. So they highlighted people that had exceptional psi ability, exceptional, mathematical skills and all sorts of skills. And basically, a la the Soviet sports program, so to speak, rounded those people up or incentivized those people to work together or to amplify understandings in basic research and development. I mean, we have a very democratic approach that's not industrially managed, but they have an industrially managed approach where, hey, we give all these accommodations to people with disabilities in our school systems, from autism to learning disabilities and so forth and so forth. And those are all good and fair, but there's not the analogous ones for the geniuses, for the exceptional people, the really bright people that don't get nurtured and supported and amplified. On the other side of the equation, understanding it's a bell curve, right? You get people on one end and people on the other end. And you need to help them both, in my mind. Help everybody, actually. So I guess I comment on that is that they may have jumped past us in their understandings in gravity control and gravity craft. I wonder, why does Henry Kissinger at 99 decide to go visit China? I mean, he was up to his eyeballs in UFOs. He was in military intelligence. We first got exposed to this in the 40s, and then went into government and so forth. And so he very much had a role. But why did he go to China at age 99? Just to say goodbye? He was very well respected there, or to tell the Chinese that you really need to do something important with the ETs or alien problem. I'm speculating. It sounds like a good remote viewing project for somebody. Anyway, that's sort of my long-winded conversation about anti-gravity and the state of affairs.
So you think the U.S. is so alone here? I guess the question comes is like, why are we not using it towards military capabilities, or at what level are we are? Or do you think it's that, again, it's like so prototype that it's not at that point yet?
I think it could be weaponized, and they could be using it militarily. But I think the secret is so important to protect, and it assumes that it's under military control rather than outside the military. I think it's important to remember that there's three types of information in the world. There's sort of white world, what you can look up on the web and Google Scholar and science. And then there's the black world. It's all classified, top secret code word, blah, blah, blah. And then there's the sort of proprietary trade secret world, which is, only a few people know how to do things. And that is where I think the space programs and the gravity control and those advanced spacecraft that are faster than light sit and live. I don't think they're under military control, or if they are, there's rumors that the old SR-71 pilots have talked to the sort of new equivalent people, and they've got new wild stuff. Maybe they've got saucers and capability, but maybe they use it just for intelligence and reconnaissance capability. That's what they did first. You don't see an SR-71 as a fighter bomber.
No.
They don't do that. No. Yeah. I mean, if you really wanted to use this technology to fight war, I suspect that you'd create a out of the Marvel movies, a sort of a anti-gravity aircraft carrier, and unlimited fuel and floating, and you just reload your weapons and keep pounding whatever you want. Like I was highlighting, over the past 10 years or so, we've seen a lot more disclosure. Do you think that they're using it as an opportunity to ease people in, or do you think this is genuine, like, whistleblowing disclosure? Like, how do you think it's kind of a game? I think that's a good point, Reed. It's sort of both. I mean, you've seen this long arc of increased awareness in popular culture from TV programs, starting with Star Trek and things like that, and Roddenberry, to more movies like E.T. or Independence Day, and to more common references in comedian shows to aliens. And it's sort of pervasive now that we've been desensitized I think there's still some shock value if the door opened and you met an alien that started telepathically communicating with you. So I think that aspect, there's been some, we're far more prepared than we were in the past. What was the second part of your question? I think it was
For the, are they looking at easing in disclosure, or do you think that's genuine whistleblowers?
genuine whistleblowers. Yeah, thank you. So I think they are genuine. I think Grouch is a genuine whistleblower. And there's not, I think they don't want to tell the truth. They don't want to explain in detail what's really going on. It goes down this rabbit hole of disclosure. And I hope there's more whistleblowers, particularly on the technology or hints. I mean, I've been in this field since, I was 15 years old in 1970 when Stan Friedman came to dinner with my father, and they were working on a program on anti-gravity at McDonnell Douglas. And so, but I really sort of got keyed into it, from the late 80s through to today, taking a 10-year off hiatus to sort of have kids and do other things. There's just been a lot of exposure to the field, and they've had plenty of opportunity to, put a FedEx package in my mailbox, they did it with a few other people, Don Berliner and so forth in history. But there's been plenty of opportunities for other people to leak, but it hasn't happened. I think primarily because things aren't on paper anymore. It's electronic, and it's harder to leak it, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I guess wrapping up, one of the things that people have highlighted as well is it's common thought to think when we think aliens, pick a planet, they're from that planet. They look like us, maybe little gray men, whatever. One of the common kind of conversation pieces, Grouch has even kind of hinted at this, but this has come from another of other sources as well, is the idea of it being interdimensional, which sits with gravity as well. The gravity obviously could be in its own type of dimension. How do you see that?
Well, it's certainly a viable theory. I don't really have any info specifically. I mean, where do they come from is sort of the question. It's, well, do they come from a different point in time? Do they come from a different point in dimension, as you say? I think that there's our notion of, 3-4 dimensions, if you count time, is shallow, is that there's probably 10 more dimensions. And what you see is people or anomalies or UFOs or ETs sort of phasing into or out of our dimension at different times. So I think that's they could certainly come from inside Earth in a simple way, or and there's probably lots of underground bases and activity. I mean, certainly are ETs on planet Earth? Absolutely. I mean, they're around. They may be in Antarctica. They may be in other places all around the planet. They certainly could be underground anywhere. What the deepest underground base that we have is a couple thousand feet down. I mean, well, go a mile down. I mean, you're still, I've forgotten, like 50 miles from the mantle or something like that. Or no, you're in the mantle. But there's plenty of places that you could go, or in the ocean. They like the ocean. Seems to be, Richard Dolan is doing a big new book on undersea objects, OSOs, that he's putting out. So, I mean, I think the ocean is a common place for them to hang out. It's probably less, maybe less stressful to the technology than going through rock or earth. That answers the question. I would say interdimensional is definitely a possibility. But
Awesome. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for coming on today. Like I said, this conversation, I knew it was going to be deep, and it definitely got deep. We're definitely going to have to do it again. But if you want to give a quick shout out, let people know where they can find everything from the book to the Majestic documents themselves. If you want to shout out quick.
Great. Sure. Happy to. The book, MAJIC EYES ONLY, you can find that on Amazon, as well as the AI ufologist. We didn't get a chance to talk about that much, but maybe we'll do it some other time.
Yeah, we'll do it down in Dallas.
Yeah. And then I'm also working on another book called UFOs, Who Knows? And sort of its famous quotations from ufology and sort of a bio about their credibility. I mean, fundamentally, that's what ufology needs is more money, more credibility, and more leadership. And I applaud you, Reed, for taking the effort to lead and interview people and get the word out. The website's majesticdocuments.com has the Majestic documents. MAJIC, MAJIC, eyesonly.com has all sorts of details about the book as well. So
perfect. That'll all be linked below. And again, Ryan, thank you for coming on. Like I said, it's profound, a lot of the stuff that's in this book. And it's one of the, most people like covering the lights in the skies, but you're actually digging into, the crash retrievals and some of the actual important aspects of it. So we'll definitely get you on to talk about the AI ufologist, because that, again, was super interesting. But I know we could spend another couple hours on that. So we'll definitely get you down in Dallas. But, for today, I really appreciate it, man. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, Reed.